You know, when you see a really successful organization, what's its secret ingredient? It's not just a great idea or a bunch of passionate people. It's the blueprint. And today, we're going to deconstruct that very blueprint. The organizational bylaws that are the difference between a thriving community and, well, total chaos. Seriously, think about it. We've all been part of groups that had so much potential, right? But then they just fizzle out. Or even worse, they completely implode. What's the one thing that almost always goes wrong? It's the lack of a clear, agreed-upon structure for when things get messy. And the answer, every single time, is a solid blueprint. A plan that everyone gets and agrees to follow. Because without that, you're not really building an organization. You're basically just piling up sand and praying the tide doesn't come in. That blueprint, that's what we call bylaws. You can think of them as the operating system for your organization. They're the official rulebook, the ultimate source of truth that makes sure everything is fair, stable, and, super importantly, legally sound. So how do we actually build one of these things? Well, here's our roadmap. We'll start with the big idea of the blueprint itself. Then we'll get into laying the foundation, figuring out who's in the community, deciding who runs the show, setting some rules for a fair game, and finally, making sure this whole thing is built to last. All right, let's start with the big picture, the organization's blueprint. Why does every single group, especially a professional one like a medical society, absolutely need a set of rules? This isn't just about boring red tape. It's the actual architecture that lets the group function and get things done. Okay, so to lay this foundation right, we've got to clear something up first. A lot of people get confused about the difference between a constitution and a set of bylaws, and trust me, they are not the same thing. Here's the deal. For most modern incorporated groups, a constitution is, well, it's pretty much unnecessary. The bylaws are the real main event. They are the detailed, legally binding rulebook that spells out how things actually work day to day. A constitution just gives you the broad strokes. The bylaws are the specific step-by-step instructions. So, what are the first few bricks we need for our blueprint? First, the official name, so everyone knows who you are. Next, the purpose. And the AMA has some great advice here. Keep it broad. That way, it stays relevant even as the world changes. And finally, the parliamentary authority, like Robert's Rules of Order. That's the rulebook that keeps your meetings from turning into a total free-for-all. Okay, once a basic frame is up, the next huge question is, who gets to be a part of this organization? And that brings us to defining the community through the rules of membership. And if we're sticking with our blueprint metaphor, the membership rules literally determine who gets to live in the house that you're building. Who's in, who's out, who gets a say. The bylaws have to be crystal clear on this stuff to avoid major headaches down the road. And here's something that's absolutely critical for any modern blueprint: inclusivity. The American Medical Association is really clear about this. You cannot deny membership for any discriminatory reason. The whole point is to get rid of those arbitrary barriers and build a place where the only things that matter are your skills and your character. So, you've got your community defined. Now, who's steering the ship? This gets us right into the super important topic of leadership and governance. You've got your standard roles, right? The president, who leads the charge, the secretary, who keeps track of all the official records, the treasurer, who's in charge of the money. But the ultimate authority, that usually sits with the governing board. They're the ones responsible for the big picture, strategic direction of the whole organization. And being on that board comes with this really serious obligation called fiduciary duty. Basically, it means that board members are legally and ethically required to manage the organization's business with the exact same care they've used for their own personal business. You can't just be careless with the group's money or reputation. It's a huge responsibility. You know, a great blueprint doesn't just plan for everything to go perfectly. It's got to have a plan for when things get rocky. So this section is all about the rules for a fair game, how you handle discipline, and just as important, how you change the rules when they need changing. When someone messes up, you can't just wing it. A fair, documented process is absolutely essential. It has to go from a formal complaint to a real investigation to a fair hearing, and only then can you make a final decision. This structure protects everybody, both the individual and the organization, from unfair or biased actions. So what if you need to change the blueprint itself? Well, it's designed to be difficult, and that's a good thing. Any proposed change needs advance written notice so no one is surprised, and here's the kicker.
It needs a supermajority, usually a two-thirds vote, to actually pass. That high bar makes sure the core rules of the organization don't get changed on a whim. And that brings us to our last stop, which is maybe the most important part of a great blueprint: its ability to adapt. The goal here is to create a living document, not some relic carved in stone that's going to be obsolete in 5 years.
A truly resilient blueprint plans for the unexpected. I mean, just think about what happened a few years ago. Organizations that had emergency bylaws in place were able to just switch to virtual meetings and keep going. The ones that didn't, they were left scrambling. That right there is the power of thinking ahead. So at the end of the day, when bylaws are clear, when they're fair, and when they're designed to be adaptable, they do something pretty amazing. They transform a random group of individuals into a truly resilient and effective community. And that is the real power of a well-crafted blueprint. Which leaves me with one last question for you. Think about the groups you're a part of, your professional societies, your local clubs, maybe even your homeowners association. Do the organizations you belong to have a healthy blueprint? It's probably worth a look.